Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us for our UCL Warning Research Centre webinar, where today we're going to be commemorating 20 years since the 2004 Indian Ocean Tsunami warnings past and present. With us today, we have an esteemed panel. We have Professor Ilan Kelman of the Department of Risk and Disaster Reduction and Institute of Global Health at UCL. We also have Professor Fatima Jayala, who's Professor of Geophysical Hazards Risks at the Department of Risk and Disaster Reduction at UCL. And we also have Dr. Jonathan Lasser, who's a Senior Scientist at GNS Science in New Zealand, and also Mujibara and Tonoti at the Japan International Cooperation Agency. I will be your chair today, but thank you very much for joining us today, where we'll be reflecting on 20 years since this tragic event. We're going to be introducing this topic today. So as you can see, these are some of the quotes that were given following the event, immediately after the event. And so we know that the 2004 Sumatra Andaman earthquake was the fourth largest earthquake in the world since 1900. So we have to remember that the earthquake itself was a significant impact, even without considering the tsunami itself. And indeed, it has been stated that the tsunami that struck in 2004 has been confirmed as the most devastating in modern history. There's lots of facts here. I'm sure many of you are aware of it, but over 227,000 people were killed during this event. Millions of people were displaced. It was an extraordinary event in the sense that it impacted over 14 countries. So we saw a really large-scale event in terms of the area, in terms of the size of the earthquake itself, and the impact was absolutely huge. Following the event, there was up to $23 billion worth in currency of 2003's worth of humanitarian aid donated. You can see here a timeline of the event, and I'm sure many of you have reflected on this over the 20 years. We've had plenty of time to reflect on this, how we've had the event and how, yes, those in Banda Aceh, as we'll be hearing about shortly, were very much impacted very quickly, given that the earthquake lasted nearly up to 10 minutes itself, had very, very short time between the earthquake and recovering from that and the tsunami hitting. But what is really astonishing is that even 1.5 hours later in Thailand, 3 hours later in India and Sri Lanka, everyone was taken by surprise by the event. And this is something that I think we wouldn't necessarily see today with the role of technology that we have. But of course, back in 2004, social media, cameras and phone and internet wasn't quite as prominent as today. Of course, the main reason was there was no tsunami early warning system placed in the Indian Ocean to either detect the tsunami or to give that warning to people. And this is really challenging because despite a lag of several hours, as I said, people were taken completely by surprise. Now, there's two reasons for this. Tsunami detection is difficult. It's complicated, it's expensive. It certainly was quite expensive in 2004. And so that tsunami detection process hadn't been set up in an Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning Center that we'll be hearing about more from Fatima shortly. But then we also have the fact that it's setting up that communications infrastructure so that we can actually share the information across different nations is a huge, complex problem. And for many countries, deeply political as well. Of course, today, we are now in a very different picture in terms of the tsunami warning centres that have been set up globally to try and protect people. So hopefully today will be a story of lessons not only learnt and identified, but acted on. But I will now hand over to Professor Ilan Kelman, who will give us a bit of a history around tsunamis in the Indian Ocean and will give us that context that's so vital. So I shall hand over now, please, to Ilan Kelman.
Thank you so much. So wonderful to be here. As mentioned, my name is Ilan. I've put my contact details in the chat so we can continue this discussion, and I will not be using slides. Instead, just describing what happened regarding the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning System, not about 2004, but beforehand. because a tsunami warning system takes time to set up, as Karina pointed out. We had that time long before 2004. Karina mentioned the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and in 1997, the IOC prepared a report about an Eastern Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning System, but no action resulted from that report. That same year, the IOC's annual report highlighted the need for tsunami warning systems outside of the Pacific. And then in 1999, the IOC mentioned tsunami warning system for the Eastern Indian Ocean. They also talked then later in 2003 about a tsunami warning system for the Southwest Pacific and Indian Ocean. And there's a recommendation from an IOC report in 2003, which describes the whole work of the working group on the tsunami warning system in the Southwest Pacific and Indian Ocean. But there wasn't really any money for it. At that time, Indonesia, as we heard, badly hit by the tsunami. In 2003, the year before that tsunami, Indonesia started developing its national tsunami warning system plan, had some support from development agencies, and it really looked forward to trying to set up a tsunami warning system for the Indian Ocean for Indonesia. Given that they'd started this initiative in 2003, there was a history before of thinking about it, investigating, and considering. And this was based on the long history of tsunamis in the Indian Ocean, because 2004 was not the first one. Yet it goes back farther. We can even look at India, which had that time for warning, and still there was almost none. Prior to 26 December 2004, back in October 1999, sort of between what the IOC was doing those initiatives, a tsunami warning system for India was recommended to the Department of Ocean Development. And there was a detailed planning document that was accepted and a budget committed in India's 10th five-year plan, which started in 2002. So there was that option there, even if it wasn't particularly focused on tsunamis at times, but certainly considering what should happen regarding Indian warning systems. Note that all these dates are still in the 90s, early 2000s. Actually, back in 1967, the issue of a tsunami warning system for India was raised at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. And the idea was supported in principle, but in the end, it was decided, well, you know what, droughts and floods and cyclones happen more frequently, and so they were considered more important for warnings. If 1967 seems ancient history, think about where tsunami warnings have existed elsewhere. And the big one, of course, is the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. So it started providing warnings of tsunamis to the public and to other organizations to coastal areas of Hawaii in 1949. It then expanded to all the Pacific Ocean around 1965. At times, there were offshoots. So the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center was providing tsunami warnings to Alaska until 1967, at which point they set up the West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center. So it's not as if even people were thinking of concentrating everything in only one place, but they were actually recognizing the need for different regions. And India and Indonesia, of course, had those initiatives. So we had the time. We just didn't do it. It really shows how much warning systems are political and social processes. They are basically disaster risk reduction or, in effect, development. Warning systems are our choice. They're about us, our governments, our politics, not really just about the sirens or the alarms at the time. Because if we only set off an alarm when the tsunami has happened, that's too late. People won't know what it means. People won't know what to do about it. And so we should have learned from the Pacific from 1949, from India thinking about it from 1967, in order to take the time that we need for a full Indian Ocean tsunami warning system. So I've put in the chat my book, Disaster by Choice, which goes through how we create these choices, how what we decide to do makes that difference. and how it is that social process with all these interacting components. So even today, people talk about a value chain for warnings, but a chain is linear. Or they talk about an end-to-end warning system, but that assumes a starting point and an ending point, as opposed to saying, well, it's the top down and it's the bottom up, and it's sinking across India and Indonesia, and it's taking lessons from Hawaii, and even recognizing that on that day, on 26 December 2004, some people looked out at the ocean and said, oh, the ocean is behaving very strangely. This is a tsunami. We have to get off the beach. And at least 2 beaches were entirely evacuated, saving a couple of hundred people, because on each of those beaches, one person recognized the signs of a tsunami and issued that warning, which people then believed. They were, lucky, if we think it's luck, that it happened during the daytime when they could see the ocean, that they were awake, that they were not under the influence of any substances. And not all tsunamis necessarily give these very clear signs with the sea behaving before the tsunami strikes. So again, it's sort of saying, tell people about the signs, but not all tsunamis give those signs, which is why we need that wider warning system. Even those scientists at the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, given the time difference, it was late afternoon on Christmas Day, they immediately were alerted that a massive earthquake had struck, and they knew the tsunami potential. But because there was no tsunami warning system about having permission to contact governments, to issue the alerts, to make it official, of course, what could they do? It was only after clear signs and reports of damage were coming through that they knew they had to act, which meant getting in contact with the US State Department on Christmas, the US State Department contacting embassies, many of whom were on holiday, and trying to get that message out to governments if people believe it. This takes time. Not just the hours, which Karina rightly mentioned as the tsunami swept across the Indian Ocean, but it takes months, years, decades of trust, of competence, of understanding, of education, of people. Because that is the warning system, people. The warning system is all of us, because any of us could have been affected on that day. Think about it. If you were on holiday, if you were working, if you lived in that area, would you have seen the signs? Would you have known what to do? And would you have been able to get people off the beach in time to save those lives? Or would any one of us have become, within that tally of over 227,000 people, all of whom could potentially have lived if only we'd listened to the signs of nature, but more to the point, the signs of people? Because we probably know the story, how in 1907, off the island, off Indonesia, again, there was a large earthquake, which led to a tsunami. It affected people, and some of those people said, we cannot have this happen again. So, for example, on the island of Simulu and in other places, the people actually knew when the earth shakes, you run for the hills. And on that morning of 26 December 2004, the earth shook. People ran for the hills, and almost all of them survived. So yes, on that morning, it could have been any of us affected by the tsunami. It's up to us to take the time to ensure that the next time, it's all of us who act. It's all of us who know what to do. It's all of us who can save lives, not just when the earth shakes, but right now, by ensuring that we have that global, comprehensive, top-down plus bottom-up warning system, not just for tsunamis, but for all hazards, more to the point, for all vulnerabilities, to ensure that we've taken the time to make people have the warnings they need and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilan, for that context. That's brilliant. Thank you. So now we're going to pass over to Muji, who is going to give us some of his reflections of the event and some of the work that he's been doing since. So thank you, Muji, and over to you.
Hey, thank you very much, Karina and Eva. Let me talk about my presentation, about my experience, especially the lessons learned after 20 years. I just visited Aceh on October this year, so I can give you an update of what's happening. First, I will give a brief explanation about my current research with Charles Darwin University about multi-hazard early warning systems, and then some important findings from my thesis related to early warning system coverage and the importance of interoperability of data, and what's the future direction of Indonesia with tsunami warnings for multi-hazard early warning systems. Because currently Indonesia is at a crossroad. Did we really learn from the 20 years after 2004? My current research is based in Indonesia. First of all, in two small islands of Bali and in Lombok, but mostly heavily being done in the Jakarta. And we wanted to try to answer whether it's possible to make a unified multi-hazard early warning system within a system of decentralized governance. Like what Ilan said, that early warning system is a social but also political process. My research is more focusing on the political process and how it involves decision made by the national and local government. If you look at the first initial findings, the penetration or where is the bottleneck? From the research, interviewing national government agencies, researchers, they are pretty confident with the sensors, satellites, instruments about early warning spread out throughout Indonesia. They're pretty confident that they can cover 100% of Indonesia, but only through the analysis and monitoring of these systems. Unfortunately, if we go to the lower level of government or the local governments, especially at the province and at the district levels that do the 24-hour monitoring and prepared to respond, only 65% of these provinces have this 24-hour capacity to respond. And it's even lower at the district and municipality levels, which only 200 districts and municipalities out of the 514 total throughout Indonesia. So the lower we go, the less coverage or capacity to respond. And if we know that the capacity right at the lowest or at the lowest level of where the people are at the village level, only 19% is covered. So if you could imagine the existence of emergency operating centers and the early warning systems at the village level is non-existent the previous to the tsunamis. So it's very important that we have the ability to measure how much are we investing in early warning systems and what is the impact and whether we can reach the target of early warning for all by 2030. And we still have 5 years, whether it's possible to have all 53,000 villages in Indonesia to be covered by early warning system or not. So this is clearly needs political commitment at the local government level to try to boost these numbers and leadership at the local village to try to boost these numbers to have early warning system for all. Another issue that findings from my thesis, there's the good news and bad news about the interoperability of data. The good news is that between the technical institutions, the meteorological agencies, the volcano survey, the public works measuring the floods and the forest fires, the Ministry of Environment, they have the competence, the trust, and capacity to do the 24-hour monitoring within Indonesia. They have the technical skills to share data sharing between these systems, but the problem lies in it's polycentric and it's decentralized. Currently, the Indonesian government, pushed by the early warning for all initiatives and the idea of the Sendai framework for multi-hazard early warning system, the national government under the National Disaster Management Agency and Ministry of Information and Communication wants to develop a single portal for all these multi-hazards occurring. But we see that there are things to improve. We have to try to understand how to unify this data sharing process, especially for responding agencies and the local government. We need to have regulations to try to regulate the interoperability of data and information through these early warning systems. Sometimes we feel that there is the tensions between top-down or bottom-up, and there is a negotiation between what is the proper architecture of multi-hazard early warning systems. We believe that since the lessons learned from the tsunami early warning systems and the lessons learned from 2004 is that whatever has been developed in the past 20 years, the tsunami warning system has become the backbone of the early warning systems in Indonesia. Therefore, it's very important to understand what is the political will of the leaders and also that key institutional establishments is already made, and that they need to be clear competence from the data guardians to enhance data sharing. That would be the key, and how this can translate to Indonesia. And on my final slide is, Indonesia is currently at the crossroad. We have the new president. We have the 20-year long-term development plan for disaster management. We want to become the Indonesian golden age in 2045 as Indonesia 100 years of independence. But there is two outlooks, the positive outlook, the negative outlook. Will the political commitment of the next president can achieve the early warning for all right up until the village level to all 250 million Indonesian citizens currently living in Malaysia? Or we will be a negative outlook based on the current trends of increased disasters, which is hydrometeorological or geological. And right now, from the past disasters occurring in Indonesia, there has been an increase of the deaths related to the geometeorological disasters, and increase of injured people and affected people. And in the future, there'll be the increase of damages and related to disasters. So Indonesia is currently at the crossroad. We have to make, the local government, national government has to make correct political choices, whether it benefits for the people or the people, the community can take charge in determining their own choice and leave it in a decentralized context, or leave it with the power of the people to understand the risk, to understand how to react, and to save their lives. So I think that's my short inputs, and I'll be happy or open for any questions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muji. Thank you very much. It was lovely to see the Indonesian thank you there. So we are now going to move on to Jonathan. So we can already see like some very different perspectives here around the technology of warnings and the sort of need to embed warnings into the fabric of our society. So Jonathan is now going to give us some additional information to think about the different facets of warnings that we're looking at in the context of tsunamis, Indian Oceans, and more broadly. So, Jonathan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Right. Yeah. When preparing for this talk, I had some difficulties in trying to be critical at the same time, trying to be balanced. But I think over the last 10 years, I tried to understand how government works, how government thinks, how formal institutions behave. So one of the struggles to understand the Indonesian tsunami warning system, when you wanted to try to evaluate those systems, is the problems that I observe at the central government level as well, even though I think Mujib provided a very good overview about what is being achieved at the national level and the positive feeling that we saw at national level. So if we ask the questions whether if a new tsunami would happen again at the same scale at one location which we expect not to happen, I think everybody expect that should not happen, but it happens in many cases. So there was cases in 2018 where we have got like 2 tsunamis. So Indonesia has been tested again like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and I was kind of puzzled by the government response to that, because in Central Sulawesi, at least 4,000 people died. Of course, because of the combination of tsunami problems and then liquefaction, but a significant a number of people got killed by the tsunamis because people didn't get a warning, or people could not develop some kind of protective behavior after listening to the natural sign, because there was a shake felt by many people around the coast in central Sulawesi. And what interests me is the response from national government. So there was a kind of big debate between the media, civil society, and also government. So the government perspective was everything was just fine. The procedural correctness, or all the procedure from national to local, has been kind of all just all right. So there was no kind of, or there's little sympathy to the victims, because what has been actually displayed is that the government argued that nothing went wrong. Now the question is, if nothing went wrong, why you have thousands of people killed by the tsunamis because they didn't know how to behave or didn't properly respond to the tsunamis, because simply there was no warning service available at the time. So that is kind of the introduction to my talk, but I would like to ask your attention to the context of Indonesia during 2004 and 20 years later. So Indonesia was like a little bit about 218 millions back in 2004. Now more than 65 million people are being born, and then now some of them becoming like teenager. Population-wise, we have more people, but in terms of also GDP per capita, Indonesia grew from just 5K in 2004 to now 16.2K USD. It's quite a big number for the country. If you look at the context of Southeast Asia, for example. And also during 2004, it was the first election year where Indonesia managed to conduct a very successful democratic process through general election. And this year, we have got like 5th democratic election with peaceful transition of power. And also at national level, you have seen Indonesia gesture to be a member of OECD going forward to the future. So the nation wanted to be, or at least the leaders aspiring, kind of having this inspiration for Indonesia to be a donor country or OECD country. So there is a kind of increasing appetite to be a global kind of leader, and the term global leader exists in many formal documents for Indonesia. It's kind of not really fully utopia, but it's coincide with this 100-year anniversary. So you have kind of renowned ambition as a nation, thinking about the future direction. So they are trying to reimagining what is possible for Indonesia in the next, let's say, 20 to 50 years to come. In the disaster policy context, there are also milestones. It has been tested by several large-scale disasters beyond tsunamis from 2004 to 2010. And then there's a few large-scale disasters in 2018. Institutionally speaking, it has been quite successful if you wanted to measure by the number of institutional setup in the last 15 years. But if you wanted to ask me how is my response to all this kind of progress, I would probably argue that there is some kind of asymmetric achievement. And so most of the progress are made in these kind of puzzles. So there are some puzzles that kind of seem to be making good progress, while there are context where we can see that there are some kind of institutional inertia that is kind of happening, and kind of picturing some kind of negative feeling about the future. So this is my last slide, trying to think about institutional progress versus institutional inertia in terms of disaster risk reduction in general, or TUs for tsunami early warning system in particular, and multi-hazard early warning system. I noticed that there is a kind of rise of populist regime and the demand for short-term media attention. So, and this is for me, it's a big problem, because as a disaster-prone country, Indonesia will always be visited by mid to large-scale disasters, or mid to large-scale hazards that are failed to be prevented and becoming disasters. And because of that, there is always kind of strong demand to display strong disaster leadership or crisis leadership. And this has a kind of negative effect on the imagination of the people in general, because they tend to think that military will be the best fit for that kind of role. And once you put military in the, so just to give you some numbers, 100% of the national, it equals the ministerial level. So 100% of the, over the last 15 years of reform, it's always the military general who led the National Disaster Management Office. And more you see military rank, higher military rank generals are occupying the National Disaster Management Office. So in Australia, this kind of phenomenon is kind of typical in 1970s, when many generals came back from Vietnam and they got no job. So they were kind of being put in the emergency offices in state level, for example. I came from Darwin before moving to New Zealand, where a major general led the emergency operation during Cyclone Trace in 1974. Indonesia is kind of going back to that kind of trajectory in 70s model of emergency management. And because of that, you have this higher attention to emergency oriented kind of policy. And with that, you kind of sacrificing long-term agenda for disaster risk reduction. And in my view, TUs and also multi-hazard early warning system agenda will be kind of put at the corner again, despite of the current effort to make it like formal and elevated to the next level. So one of my work since my PhD time is to try to understand how institutions change. So how Indonesia public institutions also could be changed and probably reformed and design towards a kind of a better institutional settings going forward. One of the theories is new economic institutionalism. It basically suggests that if you wanted to transform, if you wanted to reform institutions, you have to probably provide more incentive. But I think this kind of theory doesn't actually support. I mean, data doesn't support this kind of theory, because I think that money and incentive is not an issue at the moment for Indonesia. Or probably, if there is enough money, probably they kind of design the incentive structure in a kind of wrong way. Because up to now, I think Indonesia can have access to international financing and support. The problem is how to use that kind of support in a more proper way. That's kind of the questions that probably we don't have time to go over into that kind of details. But I think on the last point, I would like to touch about the agenda to study disaster bureaucracy seriously, because I think most of the time when you design a kind of new institutional setup like Indonesia from scratch in 2000, not entirely from scratch, but institutionally speaking, there was no proper institutional mechanism at the local level to deal with disaster in a kind of sustained way. So starting from 2008 until today, there has been a kind of proper direction where it increases the number of disaster bureaucracy. The whole countries, you have probably an arm of probably 5,000 to 6,000 bureaucrats operating in disaster response and disaster risk reduction. The problem is most of these systems are not designed to deal with disaster. Whether you talk about emergency response or whether you talk about 24/7 early warning system, kind of EOC, or whether you talk about DRR in general, like mitigation of seismic risk, for example. I think there need to be some kind of serious agenda to study about this and establishing some kind of different template of bureaucracy when it comes to disaster risk reduction services. That's kind of the points that I would like to highlight. I think I'm running out of time. So I think I would happy to answer certain questions if you have some clarification needed from me. Thank you, Karina. We'll offer back to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan, for such great insights there and sort of providing that broader political context as well. So that's really useful. Thank you. So now we're going to move over to Fatima Jalaya, who is going to be talking a little bit about some of the exciting things that she's working on. So over to you, Fatima, and please, if anyone has any questions, please do put them in the Q&A and we'll come back to them after Fatima's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Karina and Ilan, for the invitation, and also thanks to my co-panelists for really wonderfully setting the context. For me talking a little bit in this short presentation about the future of Indian tsunami early warning systems based on the gaps identified in the Ocean Decade Tsunami program, and which kind of moves towards a people-centered tsunami early warning system. This project is recently, so almost a year, funded by UKRI and NERC and the Ministry of Earth Sciences in India. And although it is a kind of, let's say, a bilateral project between UK and India, the project involves a lot of international partners who have kindly agreed to join the project. And it also has a kind of a very broad and excellent advisory team, which involves the UCL Warning Research Center. So just to give a little bit of context, Ilan talked about India and really beautifully covered the kind of, let's say, specific situation that India has in terms of earthquake-induced tsunamis. However, it is also to note that there are, let's say, Indian territories in the Nicobar Andaman Island that are quite close to the megatrust, to the Sumatra, and so the time for a potential tsunami to arrive to Indian territory can range between 15 minutes if we think of Nicobar Andaman Islands, and around 3 hours, as was mentioned, for the mainland India. And this is the time scale. I mean, 2 to 3 hours is a time scale where effective early warning can really save a lot of lives if it is paired with preparedness, as it was mentioned. The Indian Tsunami Early Warning Center, which somehow its history coincides with the tragedy that happened 20 years ago, is an official tsunami service provider for 25 countries along the Indian coast, and even covers countries in the African continent. So the objective of this project are really aligned with the objectives of people-centered tsunami early warning, which is improving the disaster knowledge and improve detection, observation, and forecasting of tsunamis, and moving towards more inclusive tsunami warning communication and increased awareness and preparedness. So this is like sort of the policy framework for the project, which is very much framed in the framework of Sendai framework and different, let's say, initiatives that meet together, like the IOC, UNESCO Ocean Decade Tsunami Program, and also the UN's Early Warning for All. And the main objective of the project is to achieve improvements to the operational, scientific, and public engagement capacities of the Indian tsunami early warning systems. And so there are different, let's say, kind of aspects that the project is focusing on that I'm going to discuss. So in terms of, let's say, organization, the project is organized in 3, let's say, work packages, which is along the line, the objective. So it has like a knowledge hub that focuses more on the, let's say, on hazard assessment and also risk assessment. And there is a central part, which is the operational core of the project, which focuses on kind of feeding, let's say, everything into improving the operational capacities of the Indian tsunami early warning system. And then the third one focuses on participatory activities that kind of reach out to people and try to increase public awareness and preparedness of the communities. So in a little bit of more detail, the first work package focuses on probabilistic tsunami hazard analysis. So one kind of keyword that connects everything in the project is moving towards a probabilistic type of analysis. And that is reflected really from source until kind of the, let's say, the effects and impacts of the tsunami. And there is also the objective of creating a set of scenarios that can be used, a set of pre-calculated scenarios that can be used by the operational system. And there is also focus on improving the capacities in terms of kind of moving in the future towards the possibility of forecasting, let's say, non-seismic induced tsunamis. On the side of risk and impact, the focus is on kind of increasing the capacities on capturing human exposure, especially the dynamics of human exposure. In fact, Elon mentioned the time of the day when the tsunami hit, and that is quite important. So our objective is to provide sort of different, let's say, pre-calculated exposure maps at different times of the day and times of the week and times of the year so that they could be used operationally. This is the second work package, which is more operational, and the main focus can be kind of summarized in terms of moving into a probabilistic tsunami forecasting, a PTF. And as you can see in the image, the idea is to use different type of input that can be leveraged to improve the prediction in time as we have more information, and to reduce the uncertainties. And one main focus of the project is to make operational the GNSS stations that are on Nicobar Andaman Islands in order to make a rapid source characterization that fits the targets that were identified in the Ocean Decade and also kind of extending and looking forward into a more of an impact-based forecasting, where you could also provide some estimates of number of people who are going to be potentially affected by a tsunami. And in the third work package, the work is really much with communities, where we have chosen 2 communities on both sides of the, let's say, coast, Odisha and Kerala, which are somehow pilot tsunami-ready communities. So the activities in the project are somehow in synchrony with the different working groups of the Indian Ocean region in IoT UNESCO. So the activities somehow start from assessing risk perception and situational awareness, and among these communities in a participatory way, using mixed methods like surveys and also focus groups and workshops, and kind of try to understand human responses and decisions. And one outcome of the project is focusing on co-designing together with the local communities inclusivity markers that can join the tsunami-ready preparedness indicators to measure the level of inclusiveness of preparedness action for the tsunamis. So I think this is all. I try to provide a, let's say, a flavor of the, let's say, different activities that are being done in the project. It's very much a activity that we are starting, and I can also mention that we are organizing our first, let's say, workshops, participatory workshops in Kerala, hopefully in April, to start to do the work with the inclusivity markers. And with that, I thank you for your attention. And this is a picture from our kickoff meeting earlier this year in May in Hyderabad, which is the headquarters of the Indian Tsunami Early Warning Systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatima, for that really fascinating overview of this project, really exciting project, which we hope will have some very significant impact to enhance preparedness going forward. I think just to kind of like sum up everything that's sort of, I guess, been said, I think it's really interesting, you know, like, for example, there is the very newly released National Geographic documentary on Race Against Time, which brings together some very interesting new footage and some stories around the events that happened on that Boxing Day. And, you know, even to hardened souls like me who talk about warnings, death and disasters all the time, I had a box of tissues next to me. I mean, it was a truly horrific tragedy for so many people that is still affecting them. So we got to remember that personal level. And of course, it was the first time we saw a tsunami of this scale. And then Muji went on to talk about the Early Warning for All initiative, which has kind of stemmed a lot from that event. You know, all the global warning surveys that were done in the 2005. It's kind of this growing momentum and interest in warning. So it's taken us probably about 10, 15 years, but we're slowly getting there. So that's really wonderful. And I think what's been really shown with Jonathan and Fatima and Ilan as well is the importance of bringing governance and laws and regulations together with warnings. So warnings are sitting within part of that broader process of disaster risk reduction. And it's important that we recognise that and how that leads within governments and across different countries and nations and political divides. It's a very, very tricky situation. And I think the event in 2004 really highlights the many complexities that are involved. And of course, technology, as many of our speakers presented, can provide an answer, but of course we can't always rely on technology. So I guess I'll kick off with one question, and we've got a few questions in the Q&A, so we'll just keep it really short because we've only got 8 minutes. But I guess I just wanted to ask, what do we do if elected leaders do not want to lead in terms of disaster risk reduction or are unwilling to cooperate with other countries. So I just wondered if any of you had any quick insights on what can be done. Ilan.
We are talking about elected, so it does mean that voters have a say, and that becomes our choice in order to demand what we need. So we all have the option to go to our leaders during election campaigns and outside the election campaigns in order to say, this is important. Here's the science. Do you want to save lives? Do you want to know for being known for being saved lives? Oh, and also it saves money, because we know that warning systems and other disaster risk reduction measures are not a cost. They are an investment, and they tend to, if implemented properly, they tend to pay back immediately and in big ways. So it's up to us to, in the places where we do have the elected leaders, to go to those politicians and say, hey, do you want to save money? Oh yes, and lives. And therefore, here's how you act, and we can provide the support and the evidence.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything?
Probably.
Jonathan.
Yeah, so I work on the policy and the governance, where the entry points to solve this kind of wicked questions, like you have a stubborn context where elected leaders doesn't want to cooperate. But so I noticed that there is kind of false promise from the collaborative governance framework that being introduced in disaster studies over the last few years. Don't get me wrong, I'm super happy with the concept of collaborative governance. But in practice, what really happens is that donors, international funders, try to distance themselves from critical civil society, who often have very, very consistent agenda on DRR and early warning system. So what really happened is, as many countries, including Indonesia, becoming like closer to being authoritarian, all this collaborative governance is kind of leading to kind of very unproductive outcomes. So, and then you on the other hand, you have the civil society who are quite critical and still being consistent with very limited resources. They have to stand up and still putting some of the agenda on the table. So thank you for that questions. I feel like being polycentric, it helps you to go through a different route for pushing new or alternative discourse regarding this context. And at the same time, I think it's time for us to challenge the idea of collaborative governance, because most of the time it's just different word to kick out critical voices that demanded what Ilan just said about bringing back some of the agenda into political, DR agenda into the political agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Right, we've got a very quick question for Fatima. Does or anyone, but I think Fatima wanted, does the new early warnings developed in India, are they close to a tsunami digital twin concept?
Yeah, thank you. I would say yes, because they have, let's say, several characteristics of a digital twin, because at least what is the direction that we are going towards, because the information is feeding real time, it is dynamic, and there are multiple sources of information. So in that sense, that is kind of something that it goes very close, and there is this idea of using machine learning and kind of trying to reduce the uncertainties as more information becomes available. So I would say, yeah, definitely that is the shift in paradigm towards digital twins for tsunami early warning.
Very exciting. This is the future. Brilliant. And then we've got a last question, which is kind of bringing together some of the ideas from Robert. So thank you for that question. And he's really focusing on how many people were permanently displaced as a consequence of the tsunami. And he's in particularly, he's asked about how small islands are resilient to tsunamis, and how is their resilience changed between 2004 and 24. And then in the same sort of context, you know, how we often focus on the big islands and the coastlines of big countries, but what about those small island populations? So I just wondered in the last 2 minutes if someone would be able to, Muji, thank you, just to address that. So over to you.
Yeah, probably the exact numbers, we don't know, the permanently relocated, but due to spatial planning after the tsunami, coastal zones, a couple of 100 meters from the beach and also from the river, it's a no housing zone. So all of those people that lived there and lost their homes had to be relocated to others. When we visited Aceh in October, people are starting to slowly creep, starting to live in those red zones or danger zones, whether they're in the coastal area, starting to build in those regions, and also in the rivers where there is no building zone. So slowly by slowly, I think some of the needs a stronger law enforcement for people to be safe and not to be living in the danger zone. So that's another challenge that we have to face for the future.
Thank you. Well, it's clear there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I know that many people are working and inspired to try and prevent the events that happened on the 26th of December, Boxing Day in 2004. So I'm sure many of us, despite our celebrations over this festive season, will take a moment to reflect on that tragedy and how that has not only shaped millions of people's lives, but also shaped the way that we think about warnings as well. So thank you so much to all of our panelists and speakers today. We really appreciate your insights on what is a very tough topic, and even 20 years later to address. So thank you so much for your insights and your ongoing work for this. We really appreciate your time here. Thank you so much to everyone who's participated for your questions today. As you can see in the chat, there's links there to follow either some of the panelists or the Warning Research Centre and events that are coming up. So I will end by saying we wish you a wonderful time over the festive season, a very peaceful, hopefully restful break, and we look forward to an exciting 2025 where hopefully we can continue to make some real progress on how warnings can actually save lives and prevent the deep economic impact, the deep social impact, the deep psychological impacts that these events have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Ilan, for inviting us. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Fatima.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.